The sun casts long shadows over the valley, where the dense forest gives way to a rugged terrain of rocks and cliffs. This remote part of the Appalachians is rarely walked by human feet, its secrets kept away from the prying eyes of civilization. The locals tell stories of a hidden cave system, the whispers of which have only recently reached the academic community. They speak of a chilling silence that surrounds the area, a quiet so profound it's almost a presence in itself. This phenomenon has piqued the interest of many, but none have dared to venture deep into its source. Several miles from the nearest town, the base camp is buzzing with activity. Tents are pitched, equipment is checked and rechecked, and maps are spread out on makeshift tables. This expedition, funded by a grant from the Historical Preservation Society, aims to uncover the truth behind the local legends and to document any archaeological significance the cave might hold. It's here that I meet my team. Our guide is a seasoned mountaineer named Cole, familiar with the region's treacherous landscape. He warns us of the unpredictable weather and the peculiar magnetic anomalies that have been known to disrupt compasses and communication devices. "This place has a way of changing the rules on you," he says with a stern look. We nod, understanding the risks, but our resolve is firm. The promise of discovery is too compelling to ignore. The approach to the cave's entrance takes us through a thick forest, the canopy so dense that it feels like dusk even at midday. The air is cool and moist, and the scent of the earth is rich and peaty. As we trek, the natural sounds of the forest are oddly muted, as if the environment itself is holding its breath. We're heading towards what the locals call the Whispering Thicket, named for the way sound seems to bend and warp among the trees. As we emerge from the thicket, the landscape opens up to reveal the cave's gaping mouth. It's larger than we anticipated, a dark void in the side of a towering limestone cliff. The entrance is flanked by towering oaks, their branches twisted as though reaching out to warn off intruders. Carvings, eroded by time, are barely visible on the cliff face, hinting at the cave's significance to those who once revered it. Is a collection of folklore and fragmented records from the early settlers, who spoke of a cursed place shunned by the indigenous people. They told of a silence that could quell the loudest storm, of shadows that moved against the logic of light. Academics have long debated the truth behind these accounts, with some dismissing them as mere superstition, and others speculating about the potential for a yet undiscovered historical site. We establish a perimeter and begin our preliminary surveys. The cave's entrance beckons, an enigma carved into the cliffside by forces both natural and perhaps supernatural. Eli the historian pores over the old texts and maps, searching for any reference that might give us insight into the cave's past. His excitement is palpable. This is the kind of mystery that could redefine our understanding of the region's history. Nightfall approaches, and with it, an unsettling calm. The normal nocturnal sounds are absent here. We sit around the campfire, discussing our strategies for the descent. There's an electricity in the air, a sense of anticipation that only the prospect of venturing into the unknown can bring. Tomorrow, we will step into the abyss, into a world untouched by light, ready to confront whatever secrets it has been guarding through the millennia. The first light of dawn creeps across the sky, painting the clouds in shades of pink and orange. It filters through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on the tents of our makeshift camp. The tranquility of the morning is a stark contrast to the undercurrent of excitement that ripples through our team. Today is the day we enter the cave, a portal to a world unseen by those before us. Julia, our geologist, is already up, her boots crunching on the frost-covered ground as she examines the rock formations surrounding the entrance. She's the one who will read the story of the earth, interpreting the language of stone and sediment that has laid undisturbed for eons. Her tools clink together as she meticulously checks her gear, her gaze analytical and focused. Maria, the cultural anthropologist, joins her, her own eyes bright with the promise of the day. She carries her camera and notebook ready to document any evidence of what's inside. Her role is to unravel the social fabric of those who once held this cave sacred, to understand their customs, their art, and perhaps their fears. Cole oversees the rigging of ropes and anchors, His experience in spelunking is vital to our safe passage through the cavern's network. He is cross-referencing old expedition journals with his modern maps, searching for any clue that might give us an advantage. Then there's me, the team leader, and an ecologist, tasked with understanding the living systems within the cave. My interest lies in the delicate balance of life forms adapted to the eternal darkness. I double-check my pack, making sure my sampling kits are ready, and my recording equipment is functioning. As the sun rises higher, casting the entrance in a less ominous light, we gather for a final briefing. I look at each member of my team. Their faces are a mosaic of determination and the thirst for knowledge. Remember, stay within sight of each other and keep your radios on, I instruct, my voice steady despite the flutter of anticipation in my chest. We don't know what we'll find in there, but together we have the skills to face it. With that, we approach the cave. Cole leads the way, his lamp cutting a swath through the darkness that awaits us. One by one we step over the threshold, leaving the morning light behind, and the cool breath of the cave welcomes us into its depths. We make our way downward, the rope steady in our hands as we traverse the steep incline. The beam from our headlamps cuts through the pitch black, allowing us to navigate the narrow passage that constricts our path. Rocks and pebbles, dislodged by our descent, clatter down into the unseen depths below us. The air is cool and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and the mustiness of long, undisturbed spaces. In some places we must turn sideways to squeeze through, the cold stone pressing against our backs. Then suddenly, we emerge into wide caverns, their ceilings lost to shadows, the ground beneath us firm and sloping gently downward. Stalactites hang above like nature's chandeliers, and stalagmites rise to meet them, forming columns that support the weight of the mountain. Maria stops suddenly, her lamp fixed on a particular section of the wall. The rest of us pause, our lamps converging on the spot she indicates. The light reveals a sequence of inscriptions etched deeply into the rock. They are complex, with patterns that suggest a meticulous hand. These markings are ceremonial, indicative of worship and veneration. I step forward for a better look, my shadow merging with the ancient carvings. The symbols are intricate, intertwined with figures that could be human or perhaps representations of something beyond our understanding. It's like the name of a god, I say, the notion settling uncomfortably in my mind. The silence feels more profound here. Eli, with his lamp highlighting another portion of the artwork, joins the discussion. Or a warning, he proposes, his voice echoing slightly. His face is lit from below, casting dramatic shadows across his expression, making his suggestion seem all the more ominous. Many ancient civilizations had deities for concepts like death, darkness, or the unknown. This might have been their version. His words hang in the air, a theory that feels increasingly plausible the longer we stand in the hallowed silence of the chamber. The passage narrows as we press on. The beam of my headlamp catches on tiny droplets that cling to the stone, the only evidence of moisture in the arid chamber. Each breath we take seems loud in the stillness, our exhalations a whisper against the silence that envelops us. Julia pauses, her hand grazing the wall. "Do you feel that?" she asks, a frown creasing her brow. The air is stagnant, she notes. Indeed, there's no current, no movement that would suggest a connection to the world outside. It's as if the cave is a world unto itself, self-contained and indifferent to the passage of time. As we delve deeper, the silence grows more profound. Cole glances over his shoulder. "It's too quiet," he mutters. The rest of us nod in agreement. In a place like this, the absence of sound feels like an oppressive force, a tangible weight against our eardrums. Maria, who's been documenting the inscriptions, with her camera looks up. There's no echo, she observes with a touch of disbelief. She claps her hands once, sharply. The sound is swallowed whole by the cave, leaving no trace behind. It's an eerie sensation. I find myself speaking less, conserving my words as though afraid to disturb the quiet. The silence is like a presence among us, an uninvited companion that follows our every move. Our path forward is a winding one, the cave's floor uneven, littered with rocks that have fallen from the ceiling over countless years. We navigate carefully, our lights casting shadows that dance around us. We should be hearing our footsteps, the rustle of our clothes, anything, Julia says, her voice barely above a whisper. The rest of us are thinking it, but hearing it voiced aloud makes it all the more disconcerting. This unnatural silence is a puzzle. A mystery that our scientific minds struggle to comprehend. The cave seems to tighten around us, the air growing cooler still. I notice a layer of fine dust on the ground, undisturbed, as if we're the first to walk here in millennia. Finally, we reach a wider cavern, a natural atrium where one would expect echoes to dance. But there's nothing. We stand in a circle, looking at one another, the beams of our headlamps intersecting in the middle of the void. The silence here is complete and absolute. The cave's chill is unrelenting, the kind of cold that clings and claws at every layer of clothing. It's a physical presence, an invisible shroud that wraps itself around us. My breath is a mist that hangs in the air before being swallowed by the darkness. We're a world away from the sun's warmth, in a place where daylight is a memory. The passage, a mere slit in the earth, seems to tighten around us. The rocky walls, slick with the weep of condensation, are close enough to touch. Julia's voice pierces the silence. "Did you hear that?" she asks, her tone sharp with the edge of panic. Her headlamp darts from one shadow to the next, searching for a source to the noise that isn't there. The rest of us pause, listening intently, but the cave offers no repeat of the sound. We're met instead with the rhythmic dripping of water, a natural sound that now seems out of place. It's nothing. Cole responds, his attempt at reassurance falling flat in the dense air. His own lamp joins Julia's in a futile dance, beams of light, skittering over ancient formations and the glistening of wet stone. We stand in a collective stillness, the kind that is full of unasked questions and unease. The cave's breath is a cold whisper against our skin, and I can't shake the feeling of unseen eyes upon us. The darkness feels thicker now, a barrier against all that is warm and alive. It's as if the very heart of the earth has turned against us. Its pulse, a slow, cold rhythm that does not welcome visitors. Suddenly we start to hear whispers. They rise and fall with no clear origin. The sensation is similar to a breeze where there is no wind, the soft susurrations brushing against my ears. My skin prickles with the instinctual alertness to the unexplained whispers. Maria's voice breaks through the murmur, low and laced with unease. "This isn't right," she states, her usual poise as a researcher replaced by the tension of the moment. Eli's hand grabs my arm. In the faint glow of our headlamps, I see the concern etched on his face. The shadows around us seem almost playful in their movements, darting just beyond the reach of our lights. "There," says urgently, pointing to a fleeting shape that dances at the periphery of our circle. Our headlamps swivel in unison, beams intersecting at the point he indicates. But the illumination reveals only the stone of the cave's interior. The path descends sharply, and we adjust our gear, preparing for the steeper descent. The air is cooler here, if that's even possible, and each breath I take feels like inhaling the essence of the deep earth itself. We are intruders in a domain that has remained untouched for millennia, and the cave seems to acknowledge our presence with a silent, watchful stillness. Cole takes the lead. He finds footholds in the most unlikely places, guiding us down the natural stairway formed by ancient geological shifts. We follow in a line. The deeper we go, the more the silence seems to press against us, a physical thing that muffles our movements and weighs heavily on our ears. Eli is mumbling to himself about the cave's potential significance, speculating on the rituals that might have taken place in these very chambers. His voice is a low hum that barely carries over the sound of our careful progress. He's lost in thought, one hand trailing along the cave wall, fingers brushing over the rough surface as if to connect with the history embedded in the stone. Suddenly there's a shift in the atmosphere, a charged moment where confusion spikes through the group. I turn around, counting heads by the beams of our headlamps. And that's when I realize we're one short, my voice sharper than I intend. The group stops and we call her name. Our voices strange and out of place in the vast silence of the cave. There's no response, no echo of our calls, just the oppressive quiet that swallows the sound. We retrace our steps, searching with a growing sense of desperation, but we come up empty. With Julia's absence hanging over us like a dark cloud, we press on through the cave's winding passages. Our steps are more cautious now. The reality that one of us has vanished without a trace is a cold weight in my stomach. We keep our headlamps trained on the path ahead and on each other, the silent agreement clear. No one gets left behind. The cave seems to respond to our tension, the air growing heavier as if charged with an unseen energy. Maria keeps her camera poised, a futile attempt to capture evidence of what might be lurking just beyond the reach of our lights. Her hands are steady, but I can see the fear in her eyes every time the flash illuminates the darkness. "We should mark the walls," she suggests, her voice barely above a whisper, "just in case." Eli nods in agreement, pulling out a piece of chalk and making a small X on the cave wall. "So we know we've been here," he says. His hand trembles as he marks the stone, and the chalk leaves a shaky, uneven line. Cole's usually impassive face is etched with concern as he keeps count of our remaining team, his eyes constantly scanning the environment. "Keep close," he instructs, his voice a low rumble in the quiet. "Watch where you step, and watch out for each other." The cave seems endless, a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers that twist and turn upon themselves. The light from our headlamps is a small comfort, pushing back the darkness that seems eager to close in around us. We're a tight group now, moving as one. Our senses heighten to every sound, every shift in the air. It's when we're navigating a particularly narrow section of the cave that I notice the silence has deepened. I turn, instinctively counting heads, and that's when my heart drops. "Where's Eli?" I ask, my voice echoing off the close walls. There's no answer, no sign of him. He was just behind me, his presence a constant for the past several hours. Panic sets in as we double back, calling his name into the void. The walls seem to mock us. The markings Eli made with his chalk are now reminders of his absence. Maria's flash goes off repeatedly, casting stark white light over our frantic faces. "He can't have just vanished," she says, but her voice betrays her disbelief. We huddle closer, the threat of being taken by whatever dwells in the cave, a silent scream in our minds. We must find a way out before the cave claims any more. My pulse thunders in my ears. The oppressive silence of the cave amplifies the sound, making it seem as if my heartbeats are the only noise in existence. Maria and Cole's faces are washed out by the white beams from our headlamps, their expressions tight with fear and fatigue. The cave's atmosphere is dense, a viscous presence that seems to cling to every surface and fills every crevice with its weight. The silence has a quality to it that is almost sentient, as if it's an entity in its own right, following our every move with predatory interest. I break the heavy stillness with my voice and attempt to pierce the quiet that has become our enemy. "We have to keep moving," I assert, fighting to infuse my tone with more confidence than I feel. Cole gives a short nod. His movements are measured, each step taken with a cautious precision. Maria follows close behind. We eventually come across a large cavern. The ceilings are so high they are lost to shadows far above. The walls stretch out wide, decorated with inscriptions that are intricate and sprawling. Maria moves like one in a trance, drawn to the carvings as she deciphers their ominous message. Her beam of light travels over the figures and symbols meticulously etched into the rock. This is a warning," she says. Her voice is laced with a horror that has been building since our descent. "What does it say?" he questions, a demanding edge to his voice that underscores the urgency of our situation. Maria hesitates, her throat moving with a hard swallow as she processes the gravity of the words before her. It speaks of the dark silence as a guardian of the deep, a keeper of secrets, she relays with a tremor in her voice. It's not just a deity, it's a curse for those who dare to wake it. The words hang heavy between us, burdened with a meaning that is as ominous as the shadows that press in from the edges of our light. A cold sensation creeps along my spine, winding its way like ice through my veins. A curse? I repeat, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Panic. That wild, unruly beast gnashes at the edges of my mind, threatening to overpower my senses with its ferocity. We need to find a way out, I assert, the words tumbling out in a rush, a verbal manifestation of the fear that spurs us into action. We've got to move or we'll end up like the others, I add. Cole's gaze locks with mine, a silent communion of terror and understanding passing between us. His eyes mirror my own fear. "Let's go," he commands, his voice a gruff bark that propels us into motion. My breathing is ragged, my lungs burn with the effort of pushing through the narrow, jagged passages of the cave. Cole is just ahead. Maria's breathing is heavy behind me. Our pace is desperate. A scramble over rocks and through tight crevices that threaten to trap us as they have trapped others before. The passage widens slightly, granting us a brief respite from the oppressive confines of the earlier crawl spaces. Here, the cave opens into a small grotto, a chamber scattered with the haunting evidence of previous expeditions gone awry. Amidst the debris, the dim beams of our headlamps illuminate a chilling sight. Cole's light falls upon a rusted climbing axe, its handle worn, the metal eaten away by time, and the damp cave air. Nearby, a shattered helmet lies. The silence seems to deepen as we take in the sight, a respectful pause for the stories that ended here, their final chapters written in the dust and darkness. My gaze catches on a leather-bound journal, its pages swollen and warped by the humidity. I pick it up, the cover crumbling under my fingers. The writing is so faded, it's unreadable. Maria is motionless, her eyes fixed on a collection of bones that rest against the far wall. Beside the remains, a small pile of personal items is carefully placed. A rusted pocket watch, a few coins, and a locket with a faded photograph. As we move to leave this space, I can't help but glance back at the lonely grave one last time. The eerie quiet is broken only by the sound of our own footsteps and the occasional scrape of our gear against the rock. The air is still, as if it's holding its breath, and the darkness feels absolute. We round a corner, and the narrow beam of my headlamp falls on a formation that looks eerily like a figure coming out of the darkness. I startle, heart leaping into my throat, but a second glance reveals it to be a stalagmite shaped by years of dripping water into a hauntingly human form. Then, without warning, the floor beneath Maria gives way. A hidden crack, a mere shadow on the ground that none of us noticed, opens like a gaping maw. She cries out. Cole and I lunge forward, catching her by the arms just in time, her legs dangling into the abyss below. Cole's strength is the only thing that keeps her from plummeting into the darkness. He hauls her back onto solid ground, both of them panting from the exertion and fright. "I'm okay," Maria gasps, her voice trembling. "I'm okay." But her wide eyes tell a different story. Ahead, a passageway stretches upward at a steep angle, a narrow vein carved through the rock itself. "This could be it," I whisper, my voice a fragile thread of sound in the oppressive silence. It could lead to the surface. Hope, frail and precious, flickers within us. Cole approaches the ascent first, his movements deliberate and cautious. He places his hands on the rocky slope, testing for stability, then nods back at us. Our ascent is a battle, each handhold won by sheer will. The rocks are unforgiving, sharp edges biting into flesh, drawing lines of pain that are quickly dismissed. Our survival instinct overshadows the stinging wounds, the streams of blood that mingle with the dirt on our skin. "Keep going. We can get out of here," Cole says, though the passage offers no glimpse of an end, no hint of the world above. Something has changed. I finally have a feeling of hope. Our headlamp batteries are dying, the light flickering and weak, like the last beats of a heart. We are exhausted, every muscle aching, our breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. The darkness around us is thick, a viscous soup that seeks to swallow us whole. "We're almost out of light," Maria pants, her voice tinged with panic. "Keep close," I reply, my own voice sounding foreign in my ears. The ascent is treacherous, a relentless climb that tests the limits of our endurance. We move instinctively, our bodies somehow finding the strength to continue despite the fatigue that cries out for us to stop. A loose rock dislodges under Cole's boot, clattering down the incline, the sound abruptly cut off as if by an unseen hand. "Careful!" I shout, my voice sharp with fear. Cole's grim nod is barely visible in the dim light. We climb, and our progress is agonizingly slow, as if we are swimming against a tide. The entity that haunts this place is close, its presence a chilling whisper at the edge of our senses. It's as though the cave itself is alive, its will bent on keeping us within its depths. "It doesn't want us to leave," Maria murmurs, her voice a mix of awe and horror. The air begins to change as we ascend. A subtle shift that signals we are nearing our goal. A faint breeze brushes against my face, the first kiss of fresh air in what feels like an eternity. "Do you feel that?" I ask, hope blooming in my chest. "The air, it's different." Cole nods, a look of fierce determination set upon his features. "We're close," he says. And then, there it is. Faint glimmer of daylight, a promise of the world beyond this nightmare. It's nothing more than a speck, but it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. "There!" I cry out, pointing towards the promise of salvation. "Daylight!" Maria lets out a sob, a sound of relief and disbelief. We scramble towards the light, our bodies driven by a surge of adrenaline, a last reserve of energy we didn't know we had. The final push is a blur, a frantic burst of activity as we claw our way through the narrowing passageway. The cave roars behind us, a sound that is felt more than heard, a vibration that seems to shake the very foundations of the earth. "Move!" Cole yells, and we hurl ourselves towards the light. We burst forth from the cave mouth, tumbling out into the open air. The brightness is blinding, the sun a fiery orb in a sky so blue it hurts to look at it. We lie there, gasping, our bodies splayed on the ground as the cave behind us falls silent once more. We have escaped the darkness, the entity, and the curse of the dark silence. I don't like people much, and due to a slew of personal reasons, most people don't like me either. To punctuate exactly how much I don't like being around others, I just recently purchased a new house so completely out of the way that my nearest neighbor is at least 1.5 miles from me. That's right, just me and nothing but the animals and trees in all directions. Now, a lot of people would call me crazy for living out here like this. If some disaster were to happen, I'd pretty much be screwed, I know. But I'm at a point in my life where I don't think I care much about that. Well, I thought I didn't. I'm such a fool. Having left the town I previously lived in at about 7 in the morning, it was at least midday by the time I'd finally hauled my beat-up truck and the few possessions I own up the curving path to my new abode. Like a monstrous serpent of earth and gravel cut right through the dense pine forest. This driveway was about 1/3 of a mile long in itself, and full of so many rocks and potholes I was sure I'd get stuck. But due to some miraculous stroke of luck, I managed to avoid having to call a tow company. The trees and greenery finally fell away to reveal a clearing with a modestly sized cabin near its center. I stepped out of my pickup, slamming the door behind me and causing a few birds to scatter from their nearby hiding spots among the thick and tangled pine trees. With gravel crunching underfoot, I walked around to the back of the truck and began unloading. Now I said I didn't have many possessions. This is true. Regardless of this fact, it still took me about 6 hours getting it all unloaded. The furniture was the hardest part. Damn near broke my back dealing with the armchair. But like I said, I don't do company well, and this includes people for moving assistance. I groaned aloud as I stretched a bit, wiping sweat from my brow as I cast my gaze up toward the setting sun. Snap! It was a loud cracking sound that echoed deep from the woods. Must have been loud as hell because it was plenty audible even at such a far distance. Damn serious tree branch right there, I said to myself as I looked in the direction it had seemingly come from. The forest was so dense that visibility fell off at around 50 feet, being replaced with gnarled branches and darkness. Didn't help that the sun was halfway down, causing eerie-looking shadows to stretch across the lawn toward my house. Regardless of all this, I focused my gaze on the spot intently. A deer? Bear, maybe? At some point I realized I'd been holding my breath for some silly reason, letting out a long exhale. Just when I was turning toward the steps that lead to my front porch, I heard it again. Another resounding snap that sprang from the dark of the woods. I whirled around to face it, but again nothing was there. Jumping at damn twigs now? I asked myself, chuckling as I finally peel my gaze from the forest and walk into the cabin, shutting the ornately carved wooden door behind me. Standing in the entryway, I looked around my new home with a grin. It really was a nice place. Had that old rustic feel to it that resonated with all the classic mountain home vibes I'd been searching for. It had even been given some pretty modern appliances. Had some nice motion floodlights on the outside as well. And I got it all for what was practically a steal. Admittedly, I didn't feel like unpacking too much after all that heavy lifting, so the majority of my possessions would remain in this room for now, standing up against the wall in neat stacks. I slipped my work boots off and moved on into the kitchen to make myself some dinner. Well, dinner, being a couple cups of ramen noodles and a beer. I realized with a groan that I'd have to go into town for some groceries, eventually. I went ahead and unpacked the TV and an old rocking chair, setting both objects down in my new living room so I could watch one of the many shitty B-movies I'd brought with me. I was a sucker for goofy horror stuff. I threw open the window next to me for some of that cool air and started digging into my ramen. Crack. I felt like I just about jumped out of my damn clothes when I heard it. Another snapping branch in the woods. But this one was closer. Yes, it was definitely closer. I settled back down in my chair, but my eyes were once again glued to the forest. Why was this setting me off? The damn woods were full of animals and sticks. It wasn't weird to hear a few snap now and then. Regardless of my attempts at telling myself how ridiculous I was being, I still gazed out the window. It was darker out there now, so I was even less likely to see anything. It was then that I realized just how quiet it was, not counting the loud fucking branches, I mean. Not a bird call to be heard. Maybe they were sleeping, I thought. But why hadn't there any crickets chirping? I'd started to feel a headache build up in the back of my skull, sweat on my brow despite the cool air blowing in through the window. Okay, enough of that then. I'd said aloud as I get up from my chair with a grunt, promptly shutting and latching the window. I'd started to wish that I had brought curtains with me. Figured I wouldn't need any this far away from anyone else, but now I felt exposed, vulnerable even. But the old .22 rifle I'd brought up here with me did provide a bit of comfort. I started back on my meal that had begun to cool. Guess I'd been looking out that window for longer than I thought. Sometime later I'd cleaned up and gone down the hall to my bedroom. It was about 10 p.m. now, and a glance out the window showed only an ocean of blackness. It was one of those moonless, starless nights that made you feel like you were out in space. By now, my headache had grown considerably, and I felt like I'd needed the help of my medication to get any meaningful sleep. Yeah, the meds are related to my issues regarding other people. Gulping a sleeping pill, I climbed on into the bed this cabin had also come with. The mattress was surprisingly a lot more comfortable than I thought it'd be, too. Wouldn't be long before I'd drift off into another one of those long, dreamless sleeps I was so used to these days. Not long at... Crack up, I sat, looking around left and right. But what greeted me wasn't the cozy walls of my bedroom. In all directions stretched nothing but dark, silent woods. If it hadn't been for the lantern, I wouldn't be able to see anything. Where'd this lantern even come from? Snap! Stabbing through the nothingness like a knife was that damn noise again. I didn't know what to do. Panic had begun to grip my insides like I was choking on freezing water. I had to get out of here. Crack! I had to run. No, damn it, no! I let out as I began my frenzied dash through the forest. Branches reach out from all sides like skinny clawed hands, ripping at my clothes and skin. But I couldn't even begin to care about my physical state at the time. I knew I just had to get out of there. Snap behind me. Another one of those god-awful snapping sounds chased me from the dark as it drew closer. What? What was even out there? Damn it. What was it? My head felt like it was going to burst, and I was absolutely covered in scrapes and cuts. I almost fall and split my skull open on a rock I didn't see but caught myself at the last moment. Crack! The noises were increasing in frequency and volume, I realized. It was getting closer. Tears stung my eyes as I cried out into the darkness, as if this would stave off the futility of my situation. But just when I thought all hope was lost, I broke free from the woods into a familiar clearing. "Yes, yes!" I yelled. I'd made it home. I just have to get inside, just have to. What I see in the clearing isn't my house. With the dim light my lantern provides, I see a tree. A massive tree. The trunk stretches high into the sky, and its many leafless branches look like the arms of some sort of colossal upside-down insect, its twisted legs attempting to pluck the very moon from the sky. I'm transfixed by the sight, absolutely dumbfounded. Snap! The horrible sound from mere feet behind me had pulled my mind back into focus. But I know it's pointless to run now. I stand there, rooted to the ground, just like the tree before me. I didn't want to see what it is, like the mere sight of it will cause me harm. I refused to turn around. I just wanted it to be over with. Clenching my hands into fists, I shut my eyes tightly, waiting for the white-hot pain of an early death to tear through me. Then I woke up. Drenched in sweat, I opened my eyes to see the ceiling in my room. "God damn!" I'd said with a croak as I practically threw the sheets off of me. Rolling out of bed, I staggered into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of ice water. It felt so good, soothing my raw vocal cords. Had I been screaming in my sleep too? Those meds were supposed to keep that from happening, I'd thought as I rubbed my hand down my face. And why did that dream feel so real? That tree. I felt like I'd seen it before. It finally dawned on me after a few minutes of silent contemplation. I turned toward the back door, opening it after more hesitance than I probably needed. The backyard was expansive, surrounded by woods on all sides except the one facing my house. A few small trees dotted the lawn here and there, but smack dab at its center was a gigantic tree stump. The thing had to be at least 10 or 11 feet wide by my count. I'd seen this in one of the pictures that had advertised the house on the website I found it on. Apparently most of the wood that made up my cabin came from this thing. I walked across the lawn, letting the cool morning air soothe my still very warm body until I stopped a few feet away from the stump, looking down at it. Well, this stump was certainly a lot more dead than the tree in my nightmare, but the width of it seemed spot on. Having such a god-awful dream on the first night in my dream home seemed par for the course with my luck. I turned and trudged my way back inside, but not before taking one last look at the woods toward the very back of my yard. It was midday after an uneventful morning passed, and I decided that maybe I would just bite the bullet and head into town for those groceries. And curtains, I grimly reminded myself. The whole way there I just kept looking into the woods on either side of my path, and when I rolled over a branch, the snapping noise it caused damn near made me swerve off the road. Those damn woods. I took a breath to calm myself. "Just a dream. You'll love it here," I said. The drive took about 40 minutes or so, total, but I could probably cut the time down after I remove all those rocks and fill in the potholes. The transition from dirt and gravel into pavement marked my arrival into the small pocket of civilization that was the town. Toward the center was a small shopping center that pretty much held all of the businesses here. Found myself a parking spot and went inside. I walked through the sliding doors of the grocery store, past the only employee stationed at the checkout area. Looked like an older woman, her hair tied up in a messy gray bun. She had thick glasses that really gave her an elderly librarian sort of look. I hope to God she wasn't chatty. After about 20 minutes of walking around on old and yellowed floor tile, I'd amassed a fairly decent haul of items. I figured it was time to check out, so I turned and started down the somewhat claustrophobic aisle when a snapping sound from behind caused me to come to a dead stop. "Here? There's no way, just no way!" I hear myself choking out. I whipped my head around so fast it could have broken my neck, but to my intense relief, I just see another employee. He was using a box cutter to break plastic straps that held a box closed. I stared for a moment before a laugh slipped its way out involuntarily, causing the guy to look my way in confusion. Realizing I probably looked crazy for doing so, I promptly turned and walked the rest of the way to the front. The elderly woman behind the checkout counter offered me a smile, and I did the best to return the gesture. But it just felt awkward and forced as usual. "Haven't seen your face before. New in town?" she asks me. Inwardly, I groaned. Yep, there's the question. I attempted to answer her as cheerfully as I could muster. "Yeah, just moved in yesterday, actually." She nodded as she continues to scan my items. I wished she'd scan them faster. She spoke up again. "I can always tell. I got an eye for faces. Whereabouts are you located anyway?" I blink a few times. "Moved into a place up the dirt road. The new cabin," I said before my brain knows what it's doing. Why did I say all that? Could have just made something up. Well, she's just some old lady anyway, I figured. I broke out of my train of thought when I realized she'd fixed me with a strange expression, her prior demeanor having melted away. She would then wordlessly hand me my last bag, and I took it from her, confused. Had I offended her somehow? Typical. In the end, I let out an awkward half-laugh before opting to leave with a quick goodbye. The drive home was done in complete silence. Upon getting home, I began to hurriedly throw curtains up over all the windows. I tried to tell myself it was just for the sake of privacy, but that was a thinly veiled excuse at best. Only after blocking my view of the forest completely did I prepare dinner. I put on some music and even sang along to it, trying to block out any other potential outside sounds. More time passed and it was eventually 8 p.m. The sun was well into setting. I could see only a faint bit of light slipping in from between the curtains in my living room. I sat down into my armchair that I'd unpacked a few hours ago, sighing and watching some of that mind-numbing TV. At some point, I guess I'd slipped into an unwanted nap, because the next thing I knew, I'm jolted awake once again by the TV I'd left on, I'd so conveniently decided. Looking at my watch, I saw it was 12 a.m. Great. I'd ruined my sleep schedule with a 4-hour nap. With a groan, I rose from my chair and fumbled my way down the dark hallway to my room. I'd figured that after last night I should try 2 pills instead of 1 this time. This way I'll be out like a light for sure. I'd taken both, slipping into bed and rolling onto my side to see my now curtained window through the gloomy darkness of my room. 20 minutes pass and I'm really starting to feel those pills taking effect. That familiar fuzzy feeling in my brain was setting in and I was... Snap! My drooping eyes open wide, bloodshot. My gaze is locked on the window. It was out there in my yard. I just knew it was. Inwardly, I fought with myself to rise from my bed and walk over to the curtains. I had to know. If I knew, I'd stop being so afraid. It's just a damn wild animal, just an animal. Just an animal. Just an animal, I whispered as I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek through. It was dark out there. Dark enough that the meager moonlight only allowed vague silhouettes to reveal themselves. Had to look around for a moment before I finally spot it. Toward the center of the clearing stood a familiar shape. A deer? No, a bit too big. I decided that it's an elk, but it was just so hard to see that all I got was a dark elk-shaped blob. I could make out its tall, lanky legs and its huge set of branching antlers that sprouted atop its head. I sighed in relief, grinning to myself for being such a baby about all this. I'd begun to look away when another snap from outside caused me to turn back around in confusion. What was it stepping on to make those noises? I cleared my yard pretty well this morning. I continued to watch it curiously, but I could feel those pills taking effect more and more with each passing second. After about a minute of watching the thing, it finally dawned on me. Didn't I have motion lights? Why weren't they on? Actually, had this thing moved at all since I started watching it? I attempted to swallow, but my throat was dry. I kept watching it. Another minute passes, then 2 more. Please just fucking move, please, I said hopelessly. But it just stands there in the dark like a statue, like something fake,
God damn it, why wasn't it moving? It was wrong. Everything about this was just so wrong, I decided. A noise catches my attention, a soft creaking noise coming from the elk. The thing. It grew in intensity until, crack, its antlers, its goddamn antlers. They twitched, then cracked and shifted like those insect-like tree limbs I dreamt of, like someone breaking an arm out of place in multiple angles, like crack. The antlers shift again, and crack again a few more times. I shut the curtains quickly to block it from view, but the memory of it is burnt into my mind. It was dark in my room. It didn't see me. It couldn't have seen me. Please, God, don't let it have seen me, I thought. I just end up sitting there on the floor under the window, panting and sweating, waiting for something to happen. But even with this fresh fear coursing through me, I could feel those pills fighting to put me under. Staring up at the clock on my bedside table, I started counting the passage of time. 12:30 a.m., 12:45 a.m., 12:50 a.m. I'm finally out around this time, I think. But I have that same horrible dream, and I wake up screaming in the morning. From my very uncomfortable spot on the floor, I was relieved to see that there was light streaming in through the curtains. I got up, stiff from my unfortunate sleeping location, and threw them open to reveal an empty backyard with that massive stump at its center. That thing was standing on that stump, wasn't it? No, it wasn't. I stubbornly thought. There wasn't anything there. That was all. All just some sleeping pill-fueled hallucination. This whole thing has just been in my head, like everything always is, I tell myself. What an idiot I was.
Regardless of how much I tell myself it didn't happen, I only went outside once to get the mail down at the end of my driveway. Otherwise, I was shut up in my cabin with the music blaring. I really liked this music. I dug out some books that I hadn't touched since buying. I put on a movie only to realize halfway through that I'd watched it the day I moved in. Something kept distracting me. The thought of that thing I saw through my window. But I just as quickly reminded myself that it wasn't possible. This was reality, not some nightmare. The worst things in these woods were bears, and even then they won't go out of their way to kill you. My attempts at reassuring myself were useless, and I could feel my anxiety growing as the hours slipped by. At around 6 p.m. I decided to shower, and I stayed in there for about an hour. Yeah, a hit to the water bill, but I really needed it. I actually did feel a bit better afterwards, too. Slipping into bed after changing, I sat there in silence. I figured that I'd forgo the sleeping pills, to prove to myself that all of this was just the side effects of some faulty drugs, and I'd end up getting a lot of money for financial compensation or some shit. Yeah, they were supposed to keep me from having shitty dreams, but the last two were worse than anything I'd ever dreamt before, and I wasn't about to go through that a third time. I stared at the clock, watching the time tick forward and internally on high alert for any totally not real noises, but I didn't hear anything. Only the usual forest sounds of crickets. I slid further under the covers and let sleep take me, for better or worse. Why hadn't I just taken the damn pills? I woke up, startled awake by rapid thudding footsteps coming down my hall. It was here in my fucking house. How? I just kept asking myself how as I scrambled toward the edge of my bed, toward the wall that had my .22 mounted on it, but it was too late. My door flew open. But what stepped in wasn't the thing outside my window. It was a man in dark clothes. Yes, someone had broken in. I froze in my tracks as I noticed he had a gun pointed at me. "Don't you fucking move," he yelled at me, and I flinched from the volume. I complied, remaining stationary. "Look, I don't have much to steal," I tried to say, but I'm cut off by another scream from the intruder. "Shut the fuck up, or I'll blow your brains out. Come here." He gestured to me with the weapon, and I reluctantly did as he commanded, walking towards the open door. Why was my luck so shit? I get over these nightmares just to be confronted with a very real situation like this. He'd forced me out ahead of him, into the adjacent living room down the hall. "Stand right fucking there," he said, and I did so. I stood there silently for almost 15 seconds. What was this? Was he thinking about what to do with me? A sharp blow to the back of my head with his gun answered that question. I fell to the floor, hitting my head again on its cool surface. The whole world just started spinning. Had my eyes on this place for a few days, he told me, walking around my crumbled form. I could feel a warm trail running down the back of my head from where he'd hit me. You should really start locking your doors. Damn it. I'd been so scatterbrained yesterday I forgot even that much. This guy had really taunted me about it too, the goddamn asshole. Couldn't he just steal all my shit and get it over with? He had been about to hit me again, I think, when it happened. Crack. That noise, it came suddenly and loudly. Even in my dazed state, I could feel the fear bubbling up. My attacker apparently heard it too, which meant it was real. It had always been real. "What was that?" he asked aloud, looking down to me. "You got someone living here with you, huh?" I shook my head as best as I could manage, but another snap from outside drew his attention again. "Yeah, you do, fucking liar." He spat out at me. He angrily marched his way down the hall, wood creaking under his shoes as he barged out through the back door and into the darkness, bellowing loudly. "Hey! Don't move or I'll shoot your—" The motion sensor lights snap on like they were designed to do. They hadn't been wrongly installed, or faulty, of course. The only wrong thing in this situation was that thing outside. From my angle on the floor, I couldn't see the man anymore. Just the illumination cast into the room by those bright lights outside. I heard the dumbfounded confusion in the man's voice, his absolute lack of understanding at what he no doubt saw standing in the middle of my yard. "What the fuck?" he'd said. Snap, 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 snap. Then the screaming began, first in terror, sheer unadulterated terror. I heard him running back to the house, screaming like that the whole way. The snapping and cracking was maddening. Like whatever out there was excited to see that pitiful man. A shark smelling blood, is what came to my mind at the time. His screams shifted almost instantly to those of agony, and he began to beg for his life. The sound of his voice was being rapidly moved from place to place outside, as if he were being thrown about by some great force. I struggled with all my might to get to my feet and finally did so. Moving down toward the open back door, I had to fight against all my instincts that were telling me to flee right then and there. As I reached the door, I shut my eyes. I didn't want to see it. I thought I did before, but now I knew without a doubt in my mind that I absolutely must not see it. A few warm droplets splashed across my face right before I slammed the door shut, locking it. Cracking, like someone bending a bundle of twigs until they all broke at the middle. I turned and frantically sprinted to my front door, the door that the would-be robber had probably come through. Finding it unlocked told me this hunch was true, and I promptly locked that door as well. Turning again to my back door, I now only realized that the screaming from outside still hadn't stopped. It had only grown more intense. I could hear vague words and phrases. His pleading had devolved into what sounded borderline deranged. He apologized over and over to his dad, his mom. Others I could only assume he knew. At one point his screaming turned into hideous laughter, only to return to screaming minutes later. Even when blood filled his lungs, even when his vocal cords were shredded, he kept screaming. Why wasn't he dead? How wasn't he dead? I felt absolute sorrow for this man, and he'd beat me over the head and tried to rob me only minutes earlier, snapping like someone breaking every bone in their body. How can I most accurately describe the sounds he made? Maybe, like a guy who'd fallen into a wood chipper feet first, but if his death was played out in slow motion. The man outside my house screamed like this for an hour and a half. I know this for a fact, because all I could do the whole time was stare across the room at the clock on the wall. What else could I have done besides sit and listen? The snapping noises of the thing outside, and what I assumed were the man's bones being broken, just blended together. Finally, mercifully, the screaming tapered off into a pitiful gurgling whine, and then silence. I sat there. I just kept sitting there, not moving, not even to get up and clean my head wound. I sat until the sun had long since risen, and when I finally got up, it felt like my body was made of jelly. I walked to the bathroom, looking into the mirror. What had felt like warm rain on my face when I'd been at the door earlier was made out to be speckles of blood that had long since dried. After frantically cleaning it all off in the sink, I left the room, then looked to the back door. Walking to it made me feel like I was on the moon. Everything was in slow motion. This couldn't have been real, I pointlessly thought. I finally pushed it open after what felt like a million years had came and went. It had been real. It had all been real, of course. What I saw I'll never forget. All the drugs in the world won't dull that scene. Strewn about my yard was the man. Yes, I'm sure that was him, all over the place. The grass was stained red, and looking to the side of my house revealed it was painted a similar color. There was meat everywhere, organs, fractured bones stabbed vertically into the earth. But the bones were so white, so clean. I doubled over and puked up the remnants of last night's dinner. Warm bile and snot coated my mouth and nose and left me choking for breath as I sputtered. Raising my head again, I noticed something else in the middle of all this carnage. The tree stump had grown into a tree again. It was alive again, significantly shorter than the one in my dreams, but still definitely a tree. In the twisted branches of that tree hung the man's intestines, draped from branch to branch like fleshy power lines. Across the front of the broad, dark trunk, facing my house, lay his skin. It had been so intricately removed from his body that I could practically see the expression of frozen agony on its stretched face. The day went by in a blur, and it's almost night again. I don't know what to do. I can't call the fucking police about this. What do I tell them? That someone broke into my house and then what? They carefully disassembled themselves and posed their body parts in my backyard? This is the kind of thing people get executed for, I imagine. My track record isn't the best to begin with. I decided it was best to just clean it up, to hide it all and pretend it never happened. It's hard getting several meters worth of guts out of a tree, especially when you stop to puke every 5 minutes. And I'll need to buy a power washer for my walls. But I realized something else while I was out there cleaning that asshole up off my lawn, and this horrible thought only solidified into truth when I heard the increasingly close snapping of branches out in the woods a few minutes ago. That tree doesn't look like it's finished growing yet.